Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I'm the medical director here at Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. I'm also a survivor of benzodiazepines, and I have protracted withdrawal injury after a too rapid withdrawal in a detox facility. Today we have our guest, John Polivick. Did I say that right?
I say Polivick, but close.
Polivick. Okay, with an O. Yeah. He's an attorney, and he recently secured a settlement of over $1 million in a medical malpractice case involving negligent benzodiazepine prescribing. I think it's the largest case of its kind that we're aware of. And we're so excited to have him today. There's been a ton of interest in this discussion. So thank you, John, for carving out time to talk to me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So just to start, maybe tell us like where you're from and a little bit about what type of law you practice so that people know.
Sure. My office is in the northern suburbs of Chicago.
Mhm.
I do all types of personal injury law, car accidents, things like that. I predominantly do medical malpractice. Um, I am licensed in Illinois and Missouri, so I probably will not take a case outside of those states.
Okay.
I could work with a lawyer in another state, but I typically, it doesn't really make a lot of economic sense to do that unless it's a really big case. Yeah, so I've been practicing for over 20 years. I used to be a partner in a different firm where we represented pharmaceutical companies. Didn't really like doing that much. I wanted to represent real people with real problems. So I switched over, and I really enjoy what I'm doing. Mostly medical malpractice, but all kinds of personal injury.
Okay, great. So, um, you have had a recent medical malpractice case involving benzodiazepines, which is why you're here. And just, right up front, you may have some limitations on what you can disclose. So if I ask anything that you can't, please tell me. But go ahead and tell us what you can about this case, like all the things. How did you find out about it? How old was this person? What was their history?
Sure. I am somewhat limited in what I can say, but I did, as part of the negotiation process, we did want to be able to talk about the case somewhat,
Okay.
both my client and myself.
Mhm.
So typically I wouldn't be able to say much of anything, but I specifically negotiated the ability to do so. But I am limited somewhat.
Okay.
But it's a little bit different of a benzo case than I think what most of your listeners are experiencing.
Mhm.
It's a wrongful death case, so the patient ended up dying.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a little bit about her. I found her pretty compelling, kind of inspirational, which is one of the reasons I took the case.
Mhm.
She grew up in Chicago. Her mom came to this country with literally nothing but two children, no father to speak of. Her mom sewed clothes for money when she was a kid. And,
Mhm.
ever since she was a child, she had her childhood dream was to become a doctor, a medical doctor. So she went to college, got a degree in math, got accepted to medical school, graduated that, got accepted into a good residency program, finished that, got her very first job as a real doctor, making what to her was a ton of money. And she died a week later after getting that job. She,
Wow.
I'm sorry, did you
I
have
just said wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And just, particularly tragic, I think that she got that job, but she had one more exam. If you've ever known a doctor, it's a grueling career path,
Oh,
very
yeah.
difficult.
My dad's
Uh,
one. I lived with one my whole life. Yeah.
okay, yeah. So medical school residency, 72-hour shifts in an ICU, nights in the emergency room. And
Yeah.
all the time you're taking these other exams,
Mhm.
step exams, board exams. She finished all of that, but a lot of anxiety along the way, which is why she got put on the benzo in the first place.
Mhm.
But she had one more exam to take, and she took that exam 2 or 3 weeks before she passed away, and she thought she failed. She was very stressed about it. She thought she just ruined her career. And about a week after she died, her husband gets a letter in the mail that she passed that exam. So
Wow.
she died before ever really completing that childhood dream.
Mm-hmm.
So she was put on a benzo by a doctor who probably should have never, even looked at a benzodiazepine. It was not a psychiatrist, not a primary care doctor. I
Mm-hmm.
won't tell you the medical specialty, but just someone that's a little surprising they even went that route. She was put on it, cut off cold turkey, and went through just terrible withdrawals.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you know how long she had taken it for?
it about 2 years consistently,
Okay.
just every day. It was clonazepam,
Mm-hmm.
not a super high dose of it, but clonazepam is a pretty powerful benzo.
Oh yeah.
So she's going through withdrawals while she's trying to complete her residency program, while she's trying to study, and so she turns to alcohol
Mm-hmm.
to deal with her withdrawal. Again, that's probably a little different than most of your listeners who are taking it just as directed. They're not abusing it. They're not misusing it and combining it with alcohol, but it is pretty common. Alcohol and benzodiazepines work similarly. They both work on the GABA neurotransmitter system. So benzodiazepines are indicated for alcohol withdrawal, for acute alcohol withdrawal, because it works. It minimizes your withdrawal symptoms. And the reverse is also true. It's a terrible solution, but it does kind of help your withdrawals. But now you got two problems.
Yeah.
So she's, kind of just spiraling out of control.
Yeah, probably desperately looking for relief,
Yeah.
as someone who's been in that state. I was also
Yep.
cold turkeyed from clonazepam. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't start drinking, but I thought about it. I
Yeah.
mean, anything to make that hell end. So makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. She was really suffering. And, a couple of weeks before she died, she walked herself into the emergency room
Hmm.
and, just said, I'm going through benzo withdrawal. I'm going through hell. I'm drinking. This is all in the medical records. I'm drinking to try to help my symptoms. Um, and that emergency room doctor prescribed her a very small amount of benzos,
Hmm.
like 11 pills or something, to because he was concerned about the benzo withdrawal, because you can die
Yeah.
from that.
Hmm.
He's an emergency room doctor, so I think he couldn't really help her from there. Um, but in Illinois, we have a prescription monitoring program, like every state.
Yeah.
So that prescription from the emergency room doctor was up on the prescription monitoring program.
Hmm.
She goes back to the doctor that we sued, and we don't know exactly what happened, but he gave her 30 more pills.
Okay.
He did not check the prescription monitoring program. He did not know that she went to the emergency room, presumably. He could have easily done that. Just check that. It takes a minute. Gives her 30 more pills, and she died 3 days later. So tough case in that you can imagine a lot of jurors would be like, no, this is her fault.
Yeah. Especially the
Even,
alcohol piece would kind
right.
of, yeah.
So even if this doctor, didn't do what he was supposed to do, they're going to blame her for combining, and she's a doctor, so she knows better. And, by the way, the combination of benzos and alcohol, it's a really nasty combination.
Hmm.
By themselves, you're probably not going to die from an overdose of either one. Alcohol, you can, but it's really rare. But combined, there's a synergistic effect. So don't do it. It's really bad. They both slow down your breathing rate, which decreases your oxygen and increases your carbon dioxide. But benzos will, we all have a reflex. So if your carbon dioxide goes up or your oxygen goes down, you have a reflex to start breathing heavily, more rapidly. If you're stuck in a pillow or something, you'll move away. But the benzos dampen that reflex. And so we think that's probably what happened. And, the medical examiner ruled the cause of death was the benzo and the alcohol combined.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
yeah,
So
so
a true overdose
yeah.
situation. Hmm.
So in some respects, it was a more difficult case than the typical case. But the potential damages here, because she was a young doctor, were astronomical. She would have made millions and millions of dollars over the course of her career. And that's one way that we measure damages in a case like this. So I think, the insurance company was really scared. And I knew that we could get zero or we could get $10 million. So I
Mhm.
think, we got over $1 million. And I think that was, fair given the risk of, a jury saying, I don't care what this doctor did, she drank and it's her fault. But in Illinois, in most states, the jury will attribute a percentage fault. So they'll
Mhm.
say, the doctor was 70% at fault, but the patient was 30% at fault. And then the jury verdict is reduced by that percentage. So they might have just said 50-50, in
Yeah.
which case, whatever they, thought her life was worth, they would reduce by 50%. But if it's over 50%, then you get zero in Illinois and many other states. So if they said that it's 51% the patient's fault, then we would have gotten zero. Um,
Who
yeah,
cold turkeyed her? Who
the
did
prescriber.
that? Okay. So
Um,
suddenly he just said no more and then put her in this terrible withdrawal and then later changed his mind and gave her more?
yes, don't know exactly why. Um, she, her psychiatrist found out that she was getting the benzos, and I think he told her, you got to stop. And maybe, I don't know, maybe he called this other doctor, or, he didn't say at his deposition.
Mhm.
He said he just doesn't know, and she's not allowed to tell us. But for whatever reason, she was cut off and then put back on, after she went to the emergency room.
Mhm. And the psychiatrist didn't think to put her back on and manage a proper withdrawal. I mean,
We probably could have included him in the lawsuit. My client, the surviving husband, did not want to because he liked the psychiatrist.
okay. So that's
But
a
yeah, she didn't get great treatment all around.
hmm
Her primary care doctor also knew some of this and didn't, help her with a slow taper or anything like that.
yeah.
So yeah, she. I hope it's okay. I haven't talked to Dr. Patricia Halligan before this call, but she was one of my experts on this case.
I
Phenomenal,
love her.
just
I
so
love her.
amazing.
Yeah.
She
Mm,
really helped me figure out how to present this case in a way that minimized, my client looking like a drunk or, drug
yeah.
addict or whatever.
Yeah.
She really has a lot of compassion and empathy, for this situation, and extremely knowledgeable. But she indicated that this woman was not getting good care all around.
Yeah.
She
Which
really
is
needed help from somebody.
sadly kind of normal when it comes to
Yeah,
benzos. This is a problem that is like there's a massive gap in medical knowledge around it, and we're seeing it all the time in our community of people just harmed over and over and over again. And to the defense of your client, I am a physician assistant. I just filmed a documentary yesterday about two physicians who also died from benzodiazepines. And it's not taught in school. So she probably didn't know at the time, when she was prescribed. Because if all the doctors she was seeing, who had been practicing for years and years, didn't know how to help her, how is she going to know as just a student, you know?
yeah. That's
Mhm.
an interesting point, because that was kind of the big defense, that she
Mhm.
should have known. She was a doctor. This was all just purposeful. But yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So
yeah.
um, yeah. So difficult case. Like I said, a lot of the cases out there are easier, just more clear malpractice. But this one just had the, potential, just huge damages that
Yeah.
made sense to go forward with it.
Mhm.
I think we'll talk about this, but a lot of the cases out there just don't have the big number that justifies pursuing the case, and I feel bad because,
Yeah, tell us about that. So you mentioned a little bit. The big number in this one was because she had the potential to make a ton of money in her
yeah,
life.
and
And
she
so
was
that,
dead. Yeah,
yeah, and the death, right? So, for example, just to expand on that, let's say I'm an attorney and I have, I'm looking at lots and lots of money and I'm not dead, but I went into like severe withdrawals and I can't work for 10 years or something because it's protracted
yeah.
versus somebody who was working, a job that they wouldn't make much money. I mean, is that how you look at things when you
It is
are,
part of it, and I feel terrible because
yeah,
a stay-at-home mom, or someone that works at McDonald's, the way that civil justice system values their life,
Hmm.
means that it is worth less than a
Yeah.
doctor or a lawyer or some high earning person, because that is one of the measures of damage. It's not the only one, but it is
Okay.
one of the kind of simple, easy ones that a jury can wrap their head around. This person would have made, $5 million over the next 10 years or whatever. It's something that's easy to quantify, whereas um, pain and suffering is much harder to quantify,
Yeah.
but it can be
Yeah.
significant.
Especially when I mean, we're talking about withdrawal. And so that kind of conjures up in people's minds, like, oh, cigarette withdrawal or opioid withdrawal. And that's what people think it is. But benzo withdrawal is much different than that. It is, I mean, the pain and suffering, it is torture. I mean, people, if they don't die naturally, of overdose, like what happened to your, well, that's not naturally, but if they don't die not of their own hand, if they die from overdose or seizure, then many people in our community will take their lives. They will suicide, because the suffering is so severe.
Right. I mean,
Um,
it's so sad.
yeah.
But yeah, that could be a potential case.
Hmm.
Again, that's really hard too. Because just like, my client chose to drink, if somebody chose to end their life, it's hard to tie it back to a prescribing doctor.
What
Um,
if you like leave notes saying, would that be helpful in a case like I am dead because of this drug? It caused me, all of that.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But again, that's tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, that could be a case.
Okay.
I mean, I guess while we're on the subject, we can talk about what I think are potential cases,
Yeah. Tell
because
me what's a good case? Like something
I,
comes in and you're like, that is a slam dunk.
yeah, because I have gotten a lot of calls. I
Okay.
guess you put out something on social media, said you were
I
going to be
just said I
talking.
was going to talk to you today and everybody got
Yeah.
so excited. Yeah.
I've gotten just inundated, flooded with calls, and so I apologize to anyone that I haven't returned your calls.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I know there's a lot of interest, and the I hate to say it, but almost none of these are potential medical malpractice cases that work within our system.
Okay.
Just you have to understand that the insurance companies fight like hell, and they're vicious.
Hmm.
This particular case settled right on the eve of trial. A lot of them won't. This one just I happened to get a good settlement. A lot of medical malpractice cases, they'll offer you zero and make you go to trial. They will
Okay.
just fight tooth and nail. So it takes
Just
a
for
lot of.
context, how long did you have to do all of this before I mean, the eve of, so what was the like lead up to that? How long did it take?
I think the case was pending about 2 years.
Okay, it's a long
Um,
process.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it can go longer than that. It can go a little bit shorter, but that's pretty typical.
Hmm.
But yeah, they are just absolutely vicious. And I don't want to get sidetracked. Remind me of what we were talking about, but in that vein, a potential client has to think about what they put this family through. In my case, and it's very common, they subpoenaed all of her mental health records,
Hmm.
and she didn't have a long history of mental health problems, which was another good thing. We'll
Hmm.
talk about that too in a potential case. Um, but they deposed her psychiatrist and all of her. They basically dragged her through the mud with her mental health history. They
Yeah.
subpoenaed
So
her
they try to make you look
crazy.
terrible. Yeah, and
Yeah,
crazy. Hmm.
yeah.
Okay.
She was absolutely crazy. There's nothing that this doctor could have done. So they'll bring out your medical and mental health history, and they're going to get it all. They subpoenaed her and her husband's phone records. And I fought that, but the judge allowed them to get, so they saw every single person that they texted or called within the last 5 years. And then they subpoenaed those people. People, they saw a number a lot, they found out who it was. So they subpoenaed friends, family, coworkers. And again, just try to make it as miserable as possible.
Oh my God.
It was very hard on our family.
Yeah, and who's paying you for 2 years of work? You just
Nobody.
giving it, waiting and hoping that you get your cut
So
at the end.
yeah, so all of my time, all of my expenses, and it's going to be at least 50,000, if not $100,000,
Hmm.
that I have to, risk, um, and potentially get zero in return. So I only get paid if we have some success. Now there
That's why
are,
you're picky about what you
I
take, right?
have to
Okay.
be, have to be.
Mhm.
I just can't, it just doesn't make sense unless there's a lot of money
Mhm.
that we can potentially win in the end, so that I can get paid and get my expenses back. And then just all that time when I could have been doing something else. Um, so I feel bad, but most of these cases just do not work economically. They don't justify that kind of risk.
Yeah.
Um, but cases that I would consider taking would be
Okay.
in Illinois, maybe Missouri. Probably won't take a case in another state unless it's just like a really big potential damages and just like egregious behavior on the part of the doctor, something very clear.
Yeah.
Um,
I think there was another case that got settled, and Dr. Halligan may have been the expert as well, but that one, they even wrote in the medical records, like, I'm prescribing this patient Xanax, which is not a benzodiazepine, and it is. So that was pretty, like, you know,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And
But
another thing, when you think the doctor's behavior is just unjustified, just not justified, you can't justify it.
yeah.
Insurance company will find an expert to come to court and say it was perfectly justified. What this
Okay.
doctor did is within accepted medical practice, and he was just exercising his medical judgment, and maybe the outcome wasn't great, but this is perfectly acceptable behavior. 100% of the time, they will find somebody that says that, and that person will have impeccable credentials and be
Hmm.
very, very, charismatic and well-spoken. They have very good experts who will say anything they need them to say.
Okay.
Um, but juries can often see through that if the doctor's behavior is egregious enough.
Okay.
Um, and the doctor we sued was a jerk. His deposition, he came across terrible. So that was
Yeah.
another thing that really helped. Just callous disregard for this woman's life, no remorse. Um, but anyway, but back to potential cases. So Illinois or
Okay.
Missouri. I talked about my client here, the woman who died, did not have a long mental health history. She just
Hmm.
was going through a lot with her career path and had some anxiety. Um, I get a lot of calls from people who have a very long and complicated mental health history,
Hmm.
years of different doctors, different cocktails of drugs. It's sad. I know they've probably been mistreated by the system. All these different drugs, on and off and on and off, different, just a cocktail of different drugs. But then they come to a point where they get a benzo and then they blame all their problems on the benzo. That case isn't going to work. It's just too easy for the insurance company. It's always about the insurance companies. The doctors, the insurance company represents the doctors.
Yeah.
They're going to say whatever problems you're experiencing now are because of your underlying mental health problems or because of all these other drugs you've taken. It's
Hmm.
not this doctor in this drug. So, the cases I would consider don't have that long, complicated history. It's just somebody was going through a bad time and they got put on a benzo, maybe an SSRI or something else. But, it's kind of like if you walk with a really bad limp, you have a bad leg, and then you get hit by a UPS truck and you hurt that same leg, it's so easy for them to say, well, your leg was already, injured.
Hmm.
You're exaggerating your injuries now to get some money.
Yeah. Even if,
So
I mean, in a lot of cases, too, what you're describing with the polypharmacy, like all the other drugs were harming them as well. And
yes,
then benzo was just the icing on the cake. And then they wake up and realize, oh, I've just been poisoned for 5 years.
yeah,
I don't have mental health problems. It's just adverse drug effects. But from your perspective, it's so messy that it's like,
yeah,
how do you prove? Yeah.
yeah, because there were maybe if you had one, but even then, unfortunately, that might not be medical malpractice because that's standard practice. As
Yeah.
many of your listeners know, you go to a psychiatrist, they're going to put you on drugs.
Yes.
And if that one isn't quote unquote working, they're going to put you on another one or a cocktail. Eventually, you're on a bunch of different drugs, but you can't sue them for that because that's just what happened. That is standard
Yeah.
practice.
Okay.
So yeah, so if you have a long and complicated mental health and prescription drug history, I probably cannot help you.
Hmm.
Um, like we talked about, it's got to be really significant damages, and that's a tough one too because my understanding is most people get better when they're injured. So again, the insurance company lawyers will say, well, you're going through a bad time, but you're going to be fine soon. And so that kind
Maybe
of,
not soon. I
maybe
mean,
not
I didn't
soon.
work for 15 years after my injury,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, I know it happens, but again, they're going to have their doctor who says, oh,
Oh, it's over quick.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And there's literature and out there that says most people recover. Is my understanding. So that kind of minimizes damages. And again, if you work at McDonald's and you go had a you don't make a ton of money and you've just gone through a few bad months,
Yeah.
it sucks. I know, but it just within our civil justice system, you just can't take. I can't bring a case like that. There has to be really catastrophic damages. You lost a high paying job or
Mhm.
some unique situation, and there's just infinite potential situations out there. I don't know what it might be, but it has
Yeah.
to be something unique,
Really
something
compelling.
kind of
Yeah.
egregious.
Yeah.
Um, and then what kind of malpractice might I consider? If the doctor is just giving you a benzo over a long period of time or too long, probably not medical malpractice either.
Hmm.
Because I think there's enough literature and enough doctors out there that say that that's appropriate in certain circumstances. Just doctor exercising medical judgment decided that a benzodiazepine over 2 years, 5 years, whatever, was appropriate. And that's
Even if they don't warn you about potential risks of
yeah.
long-term use. Yeah.
You could bring an lack of informed consent, but that's very difficult too because
Yeah.
it's all over the label. It's like that's a tough one. But that just because the doctor prescribed it over a long period of time, or just because maybe they gave you too much or something, probably not a case. It's more about I would consider cases with cold turkey cutoff
Hmm.
or really really abrupt tapering, over a week or something like that. But if it was just too rapid of a taper, probably not a case. I know there's some new guidelines that I'm not super familiar with, but
Yeah, they
I,
actually, when you said standard of care, I was like, I wanted to ask you about that. So they're brand new, came out this year. The FDA put the money up to make them, but the American Society of Addiction Medicine accepted the grant, and they're the ones who put the guidance out. But the guidance is endorsed by like 9 medical societies in the US.
yeah,
So I would think, from a legal standpoint, that that sort of establishes a new standard of care.
huge step
Maybe.
forward,
Okay.
huge step forward.
Yeah.
But the standard of care is a very vague concept.
Right.
So it's ultimately whatever a jury says it is. In
Mhm.
Illinois, in most states, it's about what, the standard of care is what a reasonably careful doctor would have done in that circumstance. So
Mhm.
if your defendant did something that a reasonably careful doctor would not do, then that's a violation of the standard of care. But what that is, and it goes back to, like I said, they're always going to have their impeccably credentialed expert say what that doctor did is perfectly fine. And then we have to come back and say, no, that expert is wrong. And here's
Yeah.
why. And those guidelines are a huge step forward in helping us do that
Yeah.
because we can look to the guidelines, even though they're not admissible in court, probably.
What?
Yeah, they're hearsay.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but the experts, like a Dr. Halligan or somebody, could point to them and talk
Yeah.
about them at trial
Mhm.
and say,
Okay.
the standard of care is based upon these, but probably can't show it to a jury and say, look here on page 3, it says this.
Mm.
You can talk about them. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. And
It
is it hard even? I mean, look, I went through this and I struggled to like get the people who loved me a whole lot to understand with all of the literature and like read this, watch this. It's an incredibly complicated thing. So I imagine if you go to jury, like just getting the jurors up on like what is a benzo? I mean, that probably takes forever.
yeah.
Yeah.
I I think you're right. There's a lot of the initial reaction is just, oh, this person's a druggie.
Yeah.
But I think after the opioid epidemic and the documentaries and the movies and the books and all the news coverage, I think more people are open to the fact that it's not just a patient being a druggie or a loser or something, that these
Yeah.
drugs are are the reason why this person is going through this. I
Yeah.
think people are much more open to it. And you have a good expert like someone like Dr. Halligan or somebody to explain the
Okay.
situation that she sees every day. um, I wouldn't, I don't, I'm not necessarily worried about the jury not appreciating that this patient is suffering. I'd be more worried about just them awarding enough to justify bringing a case. They
Okay.
might say, you've had a terrible 6 months or a year or whatever, but you're probably going to get better. So here's a couple 100,000 or 100,000. And that might not be enough to really justify taking a case.
Mhm.
It's got to be something bigger.
Yeah.
But but to your point, I think most people do not understand the severity of the
Yeah.
benzodiazepine problem and what people go through when they're in withdrawal. But I think they're open to it.
Yeah. Okay. You told me in your email that you couldn't justify getting a big public verdict, but you wanted that, and so did the family. Is that true? And what do you mean by that? You couldn't justify it.
Well, getting a good settlement does not have the pop that
Yeah.
getting a giant verdict is.
Okay.
You get a $10 million verdict that might make like mainstream news. You'll
Mhm.
get coverage within the legal community. Doctors' organizations will take notice. That's what we were hoping for. But again, the family went through so much, and there's over $1 million sitting on the table. You might get zero. I might get zero. I spent 2 years and a heck of a lot of money. So we just thought, we wanted to get that big eye-popping verdict. I thought there was a chance,
Mhm.
which is why I took the case. Um, someone else, someone did get like a $6 million verdict in an opioid case against a doctor.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but yeah, we just couldn't justify it at the end and just thought we had to.
So do you decide that, or the family, or do you kind of talk about it together?
We talk about it. It's ultimately their decision.
Okay.
But I
So if they
tell
said to
them,
you, no, we're not going to settle, go to
yep,
court, you would have done that.
absolutely.
Okay.
Um, I guess, I've never been in the situation where we just completely disagree. But I
Mhm.
I would have done it certainly in this case.
Yeah. Okay.
I was kind of kind of disappointed. I was hoping they would offer us, something like 500,000, which case would have been like, no, let's go. But they gave us just enough to make it a really hard decision.
Yeah.
And then there's other factors in play. The insurance coverage. I won't tell you how much there was, but that's another thing. Say there, for example, there's $1 million of insurance coverage, and they offer $1 million, and you could go to get a $20 million verdict, but you're not going to see any more than that $1 million,
Okay. So knowing
unless it's
that
a doctor with a
information
lot
is
of
also important. What's the
yeah,
cap? And
yeah,
don't some states have like caps on um malpractice
yeah.
awards? Yeah.
Medical malpractice is doctors are virtually immune from liability in many states.
Okay.
Illinois, where I am, has pretty good laws, and it's still not a fair fight.
Mhm.
But many states, because of those caps and other rules, it makes it almost impossible to justify bringing a case,
Mhm.
because you can only get a certain amount in the end, and so the insurance company is going to make you spend $100,000, and you're only going to get 500,000. Even if you win, it's hard to justify.
Yeah.
And there's so many other rules that the legislatures have put in place in many states that it's just they're virtually immune.
Yeah. And was your client who's deceased now, was she like in our community? Was she aware of what was happening to her and doing all this research and connecting with?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
I really don't. I'm almost positive she wasn't. Could have
Mhm.
been. We just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
I think she recognized she was in withdrawal,
Hmm.
but I don't think she probably appreciated what she needed at that time.
Yeah.
And she might not have cared. She was just in like kind of triage mode. I just got to get this exam. I got to finish my residency. I got to get this job. Just no time for it. She was
Yeah.
just really kind of stressed.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't think she appreciated the extent of the problem she had and the dire straits she was in. And I
Yeah.
don't think she was out there, looking to your website and getting involved in your
Yeah.
community.
Okay. So you guys specifically put a clause in the settlement that you could talk about this. Was that really important to her family?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They
And
wanted me to be here today to try it. Almost all of these cases, the same thing. They don't want it to be just about the money.
Hmm.
And
You
neither do
want
I.
change.
I
Yeah.
definitely don't do this just for the money. I used to, have a much safer uh, job.
Hmm.
Um, but they wanted to make a difference in whatever way they could. And
Yeah.
so they wanted the message to get out there and kind of, be a warning to prescribers.
Yeah.
If you prescribe this drug long term, you own the consequences. You at least share responsibility for the consequences. You can't
Yeah.
just prescribe pill after pill after pill, year after year, and then just let the patient figure it out. You share in the responsibility to make sure the patient is handling it well. And if you're going to cut them off cold turkey, you really own the consequences.
Yeah. And do you think that, something like this, you talking about it obviously is bringing awareness to it, but let's say there is some big public verdict at some point, some slam dunk case that gets, you go to court, et cetera. Is that sort of sending a message to prescribers like, hey, you can be sued because there was a physician in this space. He's dead now, but his name was Malcolm Lader over in the UK. And he would say, in quotes, I think maybe the only solution is going to be doctors realizing they can be sued for this. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. I think doctors, so I have a family member who's a primary care doctor.
Hmm.
Um, I think they definitely understand more than the previous generation that benzos are dangerous, that they're
Hmm.
dependency forming, that you can't just cold turkey someone. More and more primary care physicians are just refusing to prescribe them in the first place because they don't want to deal with all of this. But I still think they understand all that kind of with an eye roll,
Yeah.
like, oh, come on. Yeah, benzos aren't good, but come on. They
Yeah.
don't really appreciate what patients go through when they're cut off inappropriately, when they're
Yeah.
tapered too rapidly, or how difficult it can be. They understand more than they ever have, probably because of the work that your organization does and similar organizations, that it's a problem, it's not good. But I get the feeling there's still that eye roll. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Probably where opioids were, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, everyone knew they were addictive. They weren't, but it was kind of like, oh, come on. These people that are getting addicted, there's just, it's like a personal failure, or like
Yeah.
just losers or whatever. I still think that's going on with benzos, although they're, so, but yeah, a big eye popping verdict will open people's eyes.
Yeah. Okay. And because you guys worked in that ability to be able to talk about this, I want to know, in many cases, I've heard, not related to benzos, but just other things, they specifically try to silence people. Why do they do that, where they don't want you to talk about something?
Well, from the doctor's perspective,
Yeah.
again, it's the insurance companies running everything, but they are technically representing the doctor. And those doctors don't want their name out there associated with, no doctor wants it publicly known that he or she screwed up.
But that's
They,
not like in their board records. It's not public information.
I don't, I mean, the fact that they've been sued, it
Okay.
will become public, but the amount of the settlement
All the
almost
details.
usually is not.
Okay.
So yeah, they don't want to be known as having, there's kind of an admission of liability if it's a big settlement, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, they don't want that. And most of them don't believe it anyway. They just don't think they ever made a mistake, or that doctors shouldn't be allowed to be sued is really what most of them think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, it's probably the insurance companies too, that they don't want other lawyers knowing what they gave in a type of case. They don't want a precedent set that other lawyers will be like, oh, you can get $1 million if you
Yeah.
sue for this. They don't want that known.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What about like rehab centers? Would that be a good avenue
Yeah.
to explore? Like, why did you accept this patient? They're supposed to be tapered. The standard of care is this, and you just took 30 grand from them and ripped them off and sent them home in psychosis.
So to me, I haven't had one of those cases. That seems like one of the best. We talked about the criteria, the cold turkey cutoff. But that seems like a really good one, especially I think a lot of those are for-profit centers, right? Or are they
Oh yeah,
nonprofit?
that's what happened to me, by the way.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
your case sounds. I mean, I don't know your details, but statute of limitations, I'm sure, has ran on it.
Oh yeah, it only took me, 15 years to get better. So,
Oh God, I'm so
but yeah,
sorry.
statute of
Yeah,
limitations. Let's talk about that because
that's another big
yeah,
problem. Um, if you went to a rehab center, which I think would be a good defendant,
yeah.
especially a for-profit rehab center, that sounds like a really good case.
Mhm.
But if they cut you off cold turkey, you got 2 years to file a lawsuit.
Okay.
It can be extended under certain circumstances if you didn't know your injury was attributed to that, which is probably fairly common in this
Yeah.
area. But then,
Yeah.
at least in Illinois, you got 4 years hard line.
Okay.
So at the very latest 4 years, more likely 2 years. So if you've been injured, you think you got a good case, start talking to lawyers.
Okay. And go ahead and get started
Yeah,
before that time that clock is ticking.
yeah.
Um, you know, I told you before, I'm a PA, my dad's a doctor. I like doctors,
Me
and
too. I have
so
one in
I
my
think we
family.
should talk about also how doctors can protect themselves. I mean, you made a very important point that they didn't want to go after the psychiatrist, the family, because they liked him,
Yep.
And so even if you screw up and you're a physician, it's probably best to kind of, be nice to the family, own that. There's some apology clause or something like that, isn't there? Maybe you can tell us a bit about that. And also, informed consent. Like if doctors want to be good doctors and they want to help patients, and maybe there is some patient who's like, look, I've done everything in the world and I don't care about the risk. I want to try a benzo. Like, would some written, informed consent document with everybody's signature on it, with all the details of what could possibly go wrong, help a case too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think most doctors know this from my experience on this side,
Hmm.
that the doctor should paper trail it up. If the patient says, I really want to try a benzo, put in the medical record that this patient really wants to try it, and I advise them of all the risks. Maybe even list. I told them, there's a risk of dependency, there's a risk of withdrawal, and all that kind of stuff. Just paper trail it up if you're the doctor. Um, it's really hard. Different medical specialties are judged differently in
Hmm.
a medical malpractice case. So what a psychiatrist should or should not do is different than what a primary care doctor should or should not do, is different than what a different specialty. Like in my case, it was a different specialty who probably shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. Um, but
Yeah.
for a
Like
primary
if
care
you're a
physician,
dermatologist, what are
yeah,
you doing? Right? Yeah.
exactly. And it was along those lines. I won't say it was a
Okay.
dermatologist or not, but it was somebody like, wait, why'd you do this in the first place?
Okay.
Um, but primary care doctors, and maybe I'm biased because, like I said, I have one in the family, they're in a very difficult position here because they don't have the time.
Yeah.
They're
Everything comes in their door, everything. Yeah.
yeah. And my understanding of what it requires to taper someone safely takes a lot of time, and you need a lot of interactions with the patient to make sure they're handling it well. How are you doing? Okay, let's decrease or let's go back up a dose because you had a hard time with that step
Yeah.
down. It takes a lot of interaction with the patient to do it well. Primary care doctors don't get that. There's just
Yeah.
I don't know how a primary care doctor would even do that, because the big medical systems are pushing these doctors to see more patients. These big medical systems are just big corporations trying to
Yeah.
make money, even though they're technically a lot nonprofits. A lot of them, they're not. I mean, they're just trying to, they're really squeezing their doctors to see more patients and have less time with each one. I don't know how a primary care doctor, full time, all these patients, such little time, can do this correctly.
They're probably all on Xanax, John. No.
The doctors, they probably are too. Like
Yeah.
I said that I still think they kind of give an eye roll when they talk about benzos, but they appreciate the dangers. But I'm interested to hear, like, real experts. How does a primary care doctor, in
Hmm.
the system in which they have to work, handle an actual taper? I think they have to refer them, and then you've got a real problem of who you're going to refer them to.
Yeah, there's nowhere to
Confident.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that was the discussion we had. I sat on the patient panel for the ASAM guidance development. And at the end, we were like, great, there's 300 pages of guidance. One, who's going to have time to read it? Two, where are the doctors that we're supposed to send patients to with this guidance to do it? You know? And they were like, yeah, we realize like there's nobody, like
Yeah.
out there who's set up to do this except for a couple little boutique deprescribing clinics, and that's part of the problem. But
Yeah.
at least we
It,
have guidelines, you know?
yeah. The guidelines are great. But I think primary care doctors should just stay away from this drug.
Yeah.
I don't know if, if that's fair, but if I guess if I were one, I'd be pretty worried about it. But what I said about how the doctors don't have time to do appropriate deprescribing,
Yeah.
tapering, that is their defense. So in the context of a primary care doctor, what is standard practice is not this, like what we would all consider an appropriate taper. That would be their defense. They just can't do that. And
Yeah.
so
They're
they
like,
don't do
look,
that. And so
this
that's
is
not
how
the
the
standard
system
of
is
care.
set up, you know?
Regardless of these guidelines, the standard of care in their profession is not, this really slow patient centered taper. So, but anyway, I don't know what to tell a primary care doctor who's faced with a patient who's been on Xanax 6 milligrams for 5 years.
Yeah.
I would only suggest referring them to a psychiatrist, but then
Yeah. Like maybe you
psychiatrists,
could give them, 15 days so they don't run out or get cut off or something and make a paper trail of like, I referred
yeah,
them here, they have an appointment, they're going to get managed by somebody who has, the expertise and the skill, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great point. If you do get a patient who's been on this from another doctor, you don't cut them off.
Yeah.
You got to paper trail it up and say, I'm referring you to a psychiatrist. Here's their number. I'll give you another, month supply until you can establish a relationship with a new psychiatrist or something. Yeah, so you can't just refuse to treat them. I don't think that doesn't sound good. But
Yeah.
I think
Well, and if any medical providers are watching, BIC, we have a short list, but a list of doctors who are willing to take these cases. So if you need to refer, we have some people who are doing this work. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that is kind of, the doctors are in kind of a bind.
Mhm.
That was a pun. That was not an intended pun. But they're in a tough situation. But I think there are people who, I think like Dr. Halligan will work with a primary care doctor and help them
Oh yeah,
with this process.
coaching, teaching them what to do, et cetera, if they're willing to learn. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have psychiatrists and other physicians who will sit in on sessions with me to learn how to do this properly, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
a psychiatrist, I guess is a question for you. A psychiatrist in a typical practice doesn't have much time with patients either. How would they approach a patient who needs to be tapered off?
Unfortunately, a lot of what's happening is either the patients have to pay for self-pay doctors that are really expensive because they've carved out the time to spend with people, and this is what they're doing as their specialty, or they kind of come in our groups and they get self-educated. They buy a book. There's a new textbook called the Maudsley Prescribing Guide, and they teach themselves and they learn from all the other patients who are online how to get off of this stuff appropriately. And then because they know that the doctors get kind of squeamish about somebody who's going to be a lot of work, they just go in and say, "Look, I have a plan. I'm going to taper. Could you provide the form of medication I need, like liquid or whatever? And, this is what I'm going to do." And usually that scenario goes over pretty well, and the doctor will facilitate and let them handle it themselves. But it's like the needy sort of, I need to be in your office once a week, more doctors are more like, yeah, I can't, you're going to have to go to somebody else or.
Okay.
So unfortunately, a lot of it just falls on the patient. So it's sort of
Yeah.
a public service announcement. If you don't want to be caught in a cobweb that you have to claw out of solo with a whole bunch of like reliant on a medical system that is not set up to help you, don't get physically dependent on psychiatric drugs because that's what you're about to face.
Yeah.
you know. Yeah. Um, you somebody said, I don't know if it was in your email or somebody wrote me about this, but like tort reform, what is that? Is that relevant?
That's what I was talking about earlier when I said most states, you doctors are virtually immune.
Okay.
So I haven't heard much about tort reform. It's always kind of in the background, but back in the maybe 2000s or 90s, it was a big national discussion. Tort reform. We got to have tort reform, um, and that's when a lot of states uh, changed their laws so that patients pretty much could not sue for malpractice or made it very difficult. And Illinois did the same thing, but our Supreme Court overruled most of those laws. They said it was not, they were not viable under the Illinois Constitution. But that's tort reform, just changing the laws to make it more difficult to bring medical malpractice cases, or really any other cases. Obviously I'm biased because what I do, but I just think it's really unfair. Just we as a culture, we almost like worship corporate America. They're seen as more deserving, more worthy than actual human beings, and so all the laws favor them. If you go into one of these big medical systems and you don't pay your bill, they'll come after you. They'll destroy you financially.
Yeah.
But if you hurt them, they'll come after you. If they hurt you, then in many states there's nothing you can do. In Illinois, again, we have pretty good laws with a handful of other states, but it's still really hard.
Wow.
And that's tort reform. The legislatures have just changed the laws to make it really difficult for an actual human being to seek justice.
Mm-hmm. And is that the case? Somebody in the comments is asking about class action suits, and that's kind of the same thing that's happened there too, is somebody changed the laws that you can't sue over generics, right?
Well, pharmaceutical companies are, I mean, they're in a really good position. It's very hard to sue them. Doctors, it's a little bit easier. But class action in the technical sense is you're not going to be able to file a class action suit for a drug, for any personal injury. But I think what people are referring to are these big, what we would call multi-district litigation, where they collect all these cases. Like if somebody's suing a pharmaceutical company, it's these big groups of plaintiffs all combined together. The laws have changed. That's primarily, the U.S. Supreme Court has changed laws to make it very hard to sue pharmaceutical companies, and the actions by the FDA as well, so that they are virtually immune. With some exceptions, what's left is you can sue brand name, not generics, for the most part. Some states like Illinois, maybe you could sue a brand even if you were taking a generic. There's some potential legal avenue there, but basically you can only sue the brand for a failure to warn. So if there was a risk to a drug that they knew or should have known about and they didn't warn the patients, then you can sue them over that. But even that
may have been the case.
That's really hard.
Yeah. The boxed warning on benzos just got updated in 2020. So for all those years, maybe a failure to warn case would have been possible, but now it's all over the
so they're literally immune now for the benzo manufacturers. Even if you could sue the generics, you can't sue them for failure to warn because it's right there in the label in a black box. And before that, it was in the label. It just wasn't very prominent. They could have always put, it always warned of the risk of dependence. It just wasn't very prominent. Maybe it minimized it, but it did warn of that. And I think withdrawal too, it again probably minimized it. It wasn't very prominent. But now there's just no way you could sue any of the pharmaceutical companies because it's right there in the black box.
Yeah. Somebody's asking, what about somebody like retired? Do they have less of a case just because they're not working and is that the same like housewife sort of?
Yeah, they do, unfortunately, but you could, it depends on the case. I'm not saying I'm not saying only high earning individuals could bring a case. Those are easier. But, if you're a grandma and, your grandchildren relied upon you for childcare, that's valuable. I think a jury would appreciate if you can't do that anymore. Or, you were volunteering at the church or, the community center or something, you can't do that anymore. You could build a case around that if they were, if some grandma without a previous complicated mental health history went into one of those detox centers, came out severely injured. That sounds like a case.
Yeah.
Again, if it was egregious, clear, cold turkey cutoff,
Hmm.
then that's something I would consider.
Okay. Got it. And then just curious because we have a few more minutes. You worked in pharma before? Did you learn anything there that's helped you? Like,
Yeah,
um,
I've been involved in the pharmaceutical area my whole career. I have an undergrad in biochemistry, and then I worked in the pharmaceutical companies in a laboratory before law school. Just really bored there, and I went to law school and ended up at a firm representing pharmaceutical companies. So I've been involved in kind of the intersection of law and science and
okay.
pharmaceuticals and medicine my whole career. And
Yeah.
certainly
And
in a
that's
case like
why
this,
this benzo stuff kind of intrigued you and you
it is.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was contacted in the first place. Just through a friend of a friend of a friend, they knew that I was involved in pharmaceuticals somehow, and they just said, "Hey, this is something that might interest you." But yeah, it I've been involved in pharmaceuticals my whole career, and it helps when you're dealing with the science and medicine behind this.
Yeah. And you also know how they work. If you worked
I've
in the
seen
pharma arena, you know what tricks they're up to and all kinds of
I've
games to
seen
play. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen how the sausage is made, and it
Hmm.
scares me.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why
I'm
you do
not
CrossFit and don't take pills, right?
I'm a big opponent. I do not want to have to take. I'm not saying they're all bad,
Yeah.
but pretty much all of them we don't really understand the risks and the benefits because it's
Yeah.
been
I mean,
so.
that's not even a crazy statement to make because it's right in the literature. It says this drug is thought to work by blah blah blah, but we don't even really understand the
Yeah,
mechanism by which it, yeah.
yeah, because the evidence of the harms and the benefits are controlled by the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, in large part, and they don't want to do the studies that would uncover evidence that makes their product look bad or minimizes, the benefits of their products. So yeah, I do my best to stay away. I'm not saying I would always do that. As I get
Yeah,
older,
I mean,
health problems, I might, change my mind on certain drugs, but best to avoid in my humble
yeah,
opinion.
and be an educated consumer of medicine. It's risky. Well, tell us. You're a medical malpractice. Um, Medicine can go horribly wrong sometimes, right? People can become very badly injured by
Does
medical
all the
care.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most of it doesn't amount to medical malpractice in a legal sense or a case that would be economically viable. But I can't tell you how many calls of people enter into the medical system and never leave the same.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mistakes that are made, a lot of bad medicine out there, and it's just again, I just think these are big businesses that are just trying to see as many patients as possible, and mistakes are made often.
Yeah. Last question from the audience. Is there anything that will get an insurance company to settle versus going to trial? Like, do they want to mostly settle, or it's just like they realize, like, oh crap, we're probably going to lose. And then the night before, they're like, all right,
Yep.
yeah.
There will be no early settlement. They're
Hmm.
going to put you through hell to get to that point. It's going to take some time. Now, not
Is
100%
that
of the
they're
time, but
hoping you'll give up or
yeah,
okay.
yeah, they're hoping you drop the case. They're hoping if they go long enough, they'll get a deposition where they get some really great, testimony.
Maybe
Uh,
you'll die. Who
you'll
knows? A lot
die.
can happen in 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can tell you that this case was very, very viciously fought by the insurance company lawyers,
Wow.
and a less resilient client would have said, "I've had enough."
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't about the money for him. He wanted what he thought was justice, and so he fought through all of that. But yeah,
Is this
that's
her
their hope.
father or her, or can you tell us? Husband?
Um, I'll just say the family.
Okay,
I
that's
might have
fine.
said it earlier, but that's something I probably don't need to say. But just
Yeah. I mean, it's clear they loved this person a
yeah,
lot to fight and to go through that
yeah,
to get to
yeah,
this place. And I'm so glad they have some justice
yeah.
anyways. Yeah.
But yeah, just to be clear about that question about the settlement, settlements are few and far between. They
Hmm.
will make you work. They will punish you, and I think that's kind of just there's only a few insurance companies that defends doctors here in Illinois. I think that's just their policy. They probably have made the calculation that if they offer settlements easily, then a lot more cases will be filed. They just want to make it super hard so that
Yeah.
people just don't file. Lawyers like me just don't bring very many cases because they don't work when you have to fight tooth and nail for 2 years.
Yeah. And then for other attorneys who may be watching who aren't in your state, et cetera, do you ever do like if they're like, hey, John, I'm gonna take this benzo case, et cetera, you got any tips or whatever for me?
I've talked to quite a few lawyers who have contacted me, and I'm happy to talk to them. I enjoy it, but I'm not aware of very many that ended up filing the cases.
Hmm.
I think they talked themselves out of it, or it just didn't happen one way or another. Because I'm sure there just aren't very many. There
Yeah.
just aren't very many lawyers who understand it and then see any economic potential in pursuing the cases.
Okay. And then last thing, like what if family had, some money? Let's say they had like 200,000 stashed away. It's their retirement or something. And they were like, look, it's kind of a risky case, but we think you can do it. What if we give you the 200 grand up front? And does that make it more compelling? Like, okay, they're putting some money into this.
Yes,
And
if they wanted to pay the costs, like
Mhm.
the expert witnesses, which can be very expensive,
Mhm.
um, and maybe we could talk about sharing the cost. You pay the experts, I'll pay for the deposition. What depositions cost, $1,000 per deposition or so because the court reporter fees are getting really expensive. But we could talk about ways to share costs, or if I just don't want to bring the case, but I think it's still a decent case, somebody like that could pay the costs. I don't want to get paid for my time. I kind of like, I don't know. I've never done where somebody pays me for my time. I like doing it on a contingency basis.
Yeah.
I have some real skin in the game. But
Mhm.
that could work if it's a case that I just don't think justifies me taking all the risk. But there's a family out there, or somebody out there who wants to pay for the
Mhm.
costs. That could work.
Okay.
That could make it much. We share the costs, share the risk. That could make it much more economically viable.
Okay. Well, I've carried you 1 minute over, so
That's okay. I don't have a hard stop. If there's something else,
I think that's all the questions that we had. I think people are going to be slightly disappointed that it's harder than we think based on the fact that you were getting lots and lots of calls. So, everybody wants justice. Everybody wants to feel like their suffering, mattered in some way, but it's a lot harder than just that in
it
reality.
is.
Yeah.
And everything I've said is my opinion.
Hmm.
So I don't want to discourage people from trying to contact a lawyer in their area,
Yeah.
or even in Chicago. And you
Mhm.
can say, hey, this guy got a decent result. Just getting somebody to really think about it and listen to you is going to be hard, but give it a try. Don't give up. Everything I've said is just kind of the way I see things.
Okay. Yeah. And then just before we go, one last time, because I know you've been contacted a lot, where are you able to help people? What states specifically? Also including the things that we already talked about,
Yeah.
the best type
So
of cases. But yeah.
Illinois is best because
Mhm.
that's where I am and that's where I practice every day. I'm
Mhm.
also licensed in Missouri. Every other state, I probably can't help you. But again, if you find another lawyer or it's just a really good case, I might consider it. So that's it. And then nobody with that long, complicated history
Yeah.
that kind of just forecloses a case. Something with significant damages, that's harder to be clear about because, like I said, a grandma could really build up a good case, and then somebody that has like a clear, egregious cut, cold turkey, or 1 week rapid taper or something like that. That to me, and the statute, the 2 year statute of limitation. Think about that, but that those factors are probably the most important.
Okay. Well, thank you to your clients for working to want to expose this problem and help other people. If they're watching, that means a lot because that's what our organization exists for, is to educate and to keep this from happening to others. So thank you. And we're so sorry for the loss of that loved one. And thank you, John, for representing them. And yeah, any closing thoughts before we go?
No, thank you for having me. Like I
Yeah.
said, my client wanted this opportunity to kind of send the message, and hopefully
Mhm.
some prescribers are listening. Maybe they'll think twice. Um, and thank you for all you do. Your organization has been very helpful to me in this case. We never really talked about the case, but I went to your website and got a lot of great information. So I
Great.
encourage everyone to read that website.
Mhm.
That's how I was connected with Dr. Halligan too, who was just a very important part of this case.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
And
thank
there's
you.
other experts as well. So somebody said in the comments, like, I can't find experts. There's experts. That's the easy part, you know. There are people doing this who can testify that you were injured. It's all the other stuff that sounds really complicated and hard to get around. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So thank you very much for having me, and great work. You're
Okay.
doing a great thing over there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. So on that, we are a nonprofit. So if anybody wants to support us, you can go to benzoinfo.com/donate to make a tax deductible, oh, I can't say the word, deductible donation. Um, and thanks again, John. And yeah, be in touch if you need anything. We're here to help. So,
All right. Thank you
okay.
so much. It's
Okay,
been a
take care. Have
pleasure.
a great day.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.